Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NAPB Graduate Student Working Group webinar series in collaboration with the NAPB Commercial Plan Breeding Committee for the year 2022-23. I am Mala Ganige, serving as chair for the NAPB Graduate Student Working Group. We extend a warm welcome to all of you to today's insightful webinar on the topic Plant Breeder of the Future, Preparing Yourself for a Career in Plant Breeding. We are delighted to have such a diverse and enthusiastic audience joining us from various backgrounds and locations. This webinar aims to shed light on the exciting field of plant breeding and provide valuable insights for those aspiring to pursue a career in this dynamic domain. Whether you are a student, a researcher, or someone with a keen interest in agriculture and genetics, we believe you will find this session both informative and inspiring. Throughout the webinar, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Klaus Kohler and Dr. Brittany Jones, will share their experiences and expertise. Dr. Klaus Kohler, who is Global Talent Development Lead, Seed Product Development at Corteva, is a renowned expert in the field of plant breeding, and he will share his knowledge, experiences, and valuable advice on the skills, education, and mindset required to thrive as a plant breeder. And Dr. Brittany Jones, who is a recent graduate, will share how she began her career in plant breeding. Starting her career during the height of pandemic, she will also provide tips on how to establish strong working relationships with co-workers while working from home. So this is a wonderful opportunity to gain practical insights and learn about the cutting edge advancements that are shaping the field. We encourage all of you to actively engage in this interactive session. Feel free to ask questions, type your questions in QA box, share your thoughts, and participate in the discussion. With that, I would like to pass it on to Dr. Kohler and Dr. Jones. Thank you.
All right, I think now you can hear me. So it is my pleasure to talk to you today about, well, the plant breeding of the future. I think covering what was just introduced. So I will kind of talk a little bit about the trends in the ag industry and then go more specifically into plant breeding and how what the trends are affecting us specifically in plant breeding. So what are the talent trends in the ag industry? So when we look as an industry into our workforce, of course we're recruiting new talent, those are the people that we hire, but then we also need to think about our current employees and how we renew the talent. So how do we keep them essentially current in the technologies that we're using and all the new ways that we do work in our companies. But then we also look at our partners. So these could be public institutions, could be other companies we collaborate with that can help us in this space potentially. And of course, all of this we're trying to do to ultimately operate, effectively, successfully in the evolving ag and food system. So what are the changes? When we think about our industry, of course, there's a lot of automation going on. We have a lot more data science now than we had in the past, if you will, because there's a lot more digitized, different types of data available that we had in the past due to the automation, basically. That includes also artificial intelligence in different ways, of course, that is used now. We also look at, of course, a lot of innovation dealing with how, for example, how we phenotype. So in specifically again in breeding, how do we do phenotyping? How do we acquire different types of data that maybe we didn't acquire in the past? There's a lot of the speed of the change is pretty dramatic, I would say, in applying new technologies. That's another, I would say, fact that the speed has been accelerating over the last couple decades of change. All this, what I just said, leads to, I would say, a different type of corporate culture and leadership. It has to be more open. It has to be more collaborative than it was in the past, because we have people now of various disciplines interacting with each other. And that requires a different type of leadership. We have also now, of course, since COVID, we have more different work systems like remote work and hybrid systems where it's possible. It's not always possible. And of course, we're also really working on the diversity of our teams that is created by what I just said in the beginning. More diverse, I would say, qualifications and types of employees that we hire lead to a lot more diverse working team in general. So when we look at the employees that we currently employ, or that we kind of look for, if you will, in private industry. And this term T-shaped employee is not something that's specific to Corteva at all. Actually, you can find a description of what it means also here in this LinkedIn article from earlier this year. So when we talk about the T-shaped employee, what are we really meaning? We're talking about somebody who has a well-grounded depth in a specific functional area. So that would be, the scientist, somebody with technical background, a scientific background, whatever it may be, but then also has a broad knowledge of other fields, and especially also of other skills, of collaborating, for example. So there's definitely this sort of the top of the T, if you will, the horizontal part, that is very important that we look at. So while we are clearly looking for experts, if you will, when we hire people in terms of the functional area and their disciplines, we really look at people that bring in another skill set, other interests, that employees may have, and ultimately professional skills that help them be more effective in the team environment that they work in. And so when we think about types of T-shaped talent, just to give examples to that, we need people that lead projects, so the project accelerators, the people that can lead a project, they can bring it forward and then finally create a successful outcome of a project. Then we have within these teams people that are more connecting and finding solutions and connecting to other teams, other expertise that is needed potentially to find a solution or produce the invention or whatever it may be. Then we have the ambassadors. So in any environment, I would say, but especially in the corporate environment, we need to make sure that we talk about our accomplishments to secure that we get funding, so that people know we are being successful, and we communicate that. And then finally, of course, very important, last but not least at all, the innovators, the people that actually create the innovations and bring the novel ideas and make the next product generation. And all of this, is driven by the company strategy, of course, but it also requires a cross-functional understanding. So understanding what other disciplines may be able to contribute, a lot of collaboration, agility, but also resilience. So being able to adapt to a situation, but then also working through a problem to resolve it. So then what are the skills we're looking for, if you will? Of course, understanding the business, the seed business, or the ag business in general, the food sector, right? It's becoming more important to understand the consumer, of course, as well. Looking for outcomes. So we're looking for people that are, I would say, result-oriented and really are able to create an outcome of a project and bring it to a positive, value-driven result. Because those are the products if we sell something to a customer, we need to make sure that product actually works and provides value to the customer. So those are people that build networks, they collaborate, people that are able to embrace diversity. They're agile, they can pivot to a different approach, they can fail fast if necessary, they have discipline to follow through the necessary procedures, and they also have a sense of accountability for what they do. In addition to that, they have a sense of adventure, in terms of being excited about what they do, because obviously as we have a personal engagement in what we do, we normally do a much better job at it, and we put more energy into it as well. There are people that can lead others, but they can also lead themselves, meaning that they are able to follow through and do as they say, if you will. And a lot of us in the industry would think that at this point, for a lot of these areas that I just mentioned, there's relatively little instruction in the public institutions. That this is an area that may be lacking to a degree in the education that people currently receive in their education, in their college, in their university. So how do we attract the right talent? So because of the technology aspect and how really ag companies are now embracing technological solutions that maybe are not that they didn't 20 years ago, we are already competing for talent beyond our sector. So we're competing with companies like Google or Amazon or whatever it may be, Microsoft, because we would need some of those types of expertises now to work in the ag sector. So we need to position our industry as a preferred employer, that we are progressive, that we have a progressive use of technology, we have an innovation mindset, we have a good place for continuous learning, and really it's a growth environment for top talent, and also maybe can outsource some of those activities. But I can tell you that we now have a new space, for example, here in Johnston, where I'm located, in Johnston, Iowa, that looks very different to our traditional offices that are used by those people that are coming specifically from the IT background. And so we also have to evolve our culture in terms of reducing silos and hurdles, and thinking about how can we really live and implement diversity of thought and experience, and really also then think about the talent renewal. So how do we retain and develop the talent so they can improve their skills, but then also get used to some of the newer tools and the new methods that we're applying. So going to kind of the specific area now, what is really changing if you think about the R&D perspective, and with more relevance to breeding, the automation and the data science that we use, it really impacts the roles that we have. And from that perspective, we are clearly seeing that the automation does remove lower grade roles. I would say a lot of the temporary, less temporary workers that we traditionally, especially as a seed industry, used to hire in R&D. But then also at the same time, some of the technology upgrades some of the roles potentially to a higher grade, and maybe also potentially a few more people that are full-time. And so at least I would say in the midterm, that's clearly the case. And so we generate more types of data, we need more data QC, we have more diverse types of analyses that we're running. And if you will, the picture here on the right, it shows you what the idea was of a home computer in the 1950s. I think this is Dwight D. Eisenhower here standing in front of it. And that's what it really looks like. And I think That is clearly the change that we're seeing in understanding of what is needed to do ag research. And so when we think about the past, look at plant breeding around the year 2000, we have sort of the traditional areas of plant breeding expertise in terms of technical skills. We have the seed production and the processing. We have the yield trials and the pathology and the agronomy to grow the fields, to grow the plants, to produce the seed, and also do all the testing to make breeding decisions. And then, of course, we have safety, budgets, and people. Those are clearly fundamentals, and I would say those are still going to be critical. And when I think about automation, yes, we can think about potentially maybe having autonomous combines in the field. But when we think about especially the seed production, the whole seedling seed handling area, there are still many areas that will be less able to automate. Just think about pollination of corn, or even making crosses in wheat or in soybeans. That's of course a lot more complicated. But at the same time, of course, we do have a lot of innovation. And when we think about automation, we would say think specifically about novel phenotyping, so remote proximal sensing. You see here right on the right an example of plant height, taking plant height from a drone. A lot of the traditional data collection that we used to do even maybe 10 or 7 years ago is now largely automated. So there we have to validate the traits, the new traits we come out with. We use AI to help in the feature extraction, so converting the image to the data that we can analyze statistically. And of course, we have dihaploids in those crops where it's possible nowadays. Is kind of a standard. Seed production and seed handling and distribution also is, I would say, centralized and automated. And also, we're starting to use more and more robots in the seed distribution area, but then also experimenting with that in the field. At the same time, I think the other area that's clearly changing is that we generate more information, more types of data. That gives us more decision power. We have the genotype, of course, nowadays, always as, if you will, a co-variable, and the phenotype. And we're using those relationships quite a bit to help us in advanced decision-making tools that we really didn't have, I would say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And including also looking at, for example, genotype by environment and understanding the environmental data better, thinking about data quality, using the machine, if you will, that we're creating here, then to do predictions for selection, to do predictions of breeding population performance, modeling different selection strategies, and so on. And so it essentially then we come to the nomer, if you will, and we can talk about that later in your question, also to the gamer breeder, where the breeder can do, I would say, a lot of in silico type of modeling as they decide on their breeding strategies for a specific material group or a specific region, and so on. So I think those are clearly the changes. And so from that sense, we also have skill sets now that maybe we didn't require that much in the past. So I think there's an increased interest in plant physiology nowadays to understand why the plant, a specific genotype, is responding in a certain way. Of course, all the molecular and genetics tools that are needed to get the genotype and develop and determine the genotype, if you will. But now also we go into soil science, potentially, especially as we try to find new methods to have a more climate positive agriculture. And of course, engineering is becoming much more important with all the new equipment and IT solutions that are necessary to, for example, work with drones or with proximal sensing. And that includes then also thinking about, working with satellites more and more, the resolution of satellites and the cost of imaging from a satellite is becoming more reasonable, and I would say more interesting. So that is now then, that is also then requires more data science. So a lot more emphasis on our employees being able to do some programming themselves, and of course then specific experts that can help us data scientists with some of the machine learning approaches to again extract features, converting this disease scale, if you will, of images into actual ratings that we can then use in our data analysis. And so when we think about other types of changes, I would say that clearly when we think back 20, 30 years, the breeding program was fairly independent. The breeders in each location at their sites were fairly independent in they had a certain target as a maturity maybe, but otherwise the populations they would produce, how they would handle them, all that was pretty much within their own reach and I think organizational responsibility. Yes, there were winter nurseries already. We've had those for many decades, but otherwise that was 30 years ago there were no dihaploids. So nowadays we have much more interdependencies between breeding programs because we have a central group that will produce dihaploids. We have genotyping. We have the whole area of genomic prediction and the tools that are necessary to generate those. And of course, now we also have centralization of seed production and distribution. So in other words, there's a lot more interdependence now between different centers, between different locations to create for the breeders, essentially to have all the data that they need to make their decisions and drive the breeding programs. And of course, there are also more time spent on analyzing data with specific analytics approaches than there was in the past. And so what is the outcome of that? We have, I would say, a more team-based decision making now, where breeders are working together with other breeders or other experts, of course, other scientists. And so then experiment planning and all these things are done potentially more also for a team. We are looking at combined data analysis and also then, as I said before, maybe some decision making that's based on algorithms and modeling and looking at different approaches and finding the one that works the best for the target at hand. And all of this then leads to some more specialization, especially for the breeders, but especially also for what we would call the associate level, our research associates, that their work also gets to, for some of them, gets more specialized, and new roles are emerging because of what I just said. So in summary, I would say that plant breeding is becoming more and more complex for sure. As I said, nowadays the breeding programs are much more interdependent. More data is generated. More tools are there, And as a result, the way a breeder works is changed quite a bit from what it was in the past. And if we want to project this into the future, I would clearly say that this trend, of course, will continue. But as I said, also that there are certain things that will still stay fairly traditional, at least for a while. And so I think some of this change has been, and will be gradual, albeit at a fairly good speed, I would say, what we can see from the past. I think that's all I had. So then we can go to Brittany, and then we have hopefully still a lot of time for questions later on.
Great. I'm going to steal the screen from you, Klaus.
Yep.
All right. You guys can stare at my adorable little girl for 2 seconds.
Yes.
Okay, you guys give me an indication if you can see my screen.
Yes.
You should be seeing.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Brittany Jones. Today, what I'm going to be talking to you about is a little bit different than Klaus just covered. He did an amazing job of kind of covering what the industry is looking for, skill sets that are really needed, and how plants breeding is transforming. So what I want to talk to you about a little bit today is my perspective and experience on establishing a successful career. So 2 caveats right up front. I believe there are many paths to success. So what worked for me doesn't necessarily mean what you're doing right now is not going to work for you as well. So take these all as tips and tricks that I think helped me establish a career. And the second thing that I want to share with you guys is that I'm currently in my 3rd year of my career at Bayer. And so all of this is very new and fresh to me. But I think also you should be talking to people with more time and experience as well as they transition between early career, mid-career, late career. So take that into account. So really where my perspective, I believe, is a bit unique is I joined Bayer straight out of grad school and during the height of the pandemic. So I onboarded remotely, and then I ended up moving to Chesterfield, Missouri 6 months in, and have had the privilege of being in a hybrid situation. So I work quite a bit from home, but also get to enjoy some in-person meetings as well. Let's make sure. Okay, it's transitioning. So I've broken my talk today into 5 different parts. So the first 4 really will be where I'm contributing my tips and tricks on what I believe you can use to establish a successful career. So it starts with preparing for that job search, getting the interview, once you've nailed the job, then how to be successful in your onboarding, and then how to grow that career over years and time. And then I'm going to end today with just a bit of wisdom that has been shared with me from mentors in my life on how to have a good perspective about when you think about your career journey. So we're going to start first off by just talking about preparing yourself for that job search. So when I sat down, I talked with some of my colleagues, these were the 4 themes that really dominated this area. So the first being networking. You probably won't hear that for the first time. I hope it's not the first time you're hearing how important networking is. This will become the bread and butter of your career. It's something that will carry you through different roles, different companies, wherever you end up. So it's really important that you advocate for yourself. Take the time to really be passionate about connecting with people. You're already all currently involved with NAPB, which has been an awesome, launching for myself early careers, the people I was able to connect with, both at meetings, but also through different committee service as well. So if you're particularly interested in a role, I would encourage you to make sure you're setting up time with professionals that are in that space. Set up regular connection points, ask questions. Really, it's your job to make sure that you're understanding the industry and the perspective of industry. And Klaus just gave you a really good summary of that. So if you want to learn more, I'd suggest you connect with Klaus. But really take the time to be intentional about expanding your network, because at the end of the day, it is about who you know and who knows you and people's perspectives and how they feel when your name is mentioned in a group space. The other thing that I think is really impactful and helped me quite early on in my career was finding a mentor. So being intentional and putting effort into fostering a mentor-mentee relationship, I think, is a game changer. And I think it's important to mention that the bulk of that work in that relationship does fall on you as the mentee. So make sure you're bringing, the energy, the vision, and the thought to all of those meetings. But to be quite honest, a good mentor or an advocate can really open doors for you. I can't tell you guys enough about the awesome opportunities and experiences and leadership opportunities I've been able to, take part in, because somebody like a good mentor just advocated for me and said, hey, maybe you should let Brittany join that team. The other thing that a mentor can also do for you is help work on a resume. So that brings me to my third point, crafting your resume. Don't skip on this. I know it certainly wasn't and still is not my favorite thing in the world to work on, but they're important, right? I hope you're not spending the few hours before you submit a job application putting together your resume for the first time. Start early, seek advice, ask questions, ask for examples of people that are currently in roles that you want to have. And know that there's a difference between a CV and a resume, particularly if you're submitting an application for an industry role. Your resume should never be more than 2 pages. So make sure you're seeking advice and getting feedback. Also, know your core competencies and skills, because these will transfer across functions and divisions and really make you more of an advertisable candidate. And the last thing I'll say in terms of when you're preparing for that job search is don't wait too long to start. You should start looking really a year out. Start asking people questions about the current, environment and culture of hiring. What are people interested in? How are people being successful? And then start actually submitting applications at least 6 months out before you finish. And by that I mean, but 6 months before your defense date. A hiring manager will always wait for the right person. And even if you're applying too early and you get that feedback, it's okay. That means they heard your name, they've seen your face, and they're aware that you're interested. All right, so we're going to transition to actually how you get that interview and that job. So when I sat down and I was putting together this presentation, I asked myself, like, what made me successful? And like I said, I think everybody has, their own perspective and their own pathway, but these 3 things I think are incredibly important. So first and foremost, don't limit yourself. I think we can sometimes be afraid right out of grad school if we don't necessarily meet all of that expansive list of needs, right, in a qualifying candidate. Don't let that stop you. If you're interested or passionate about that space, ask, reach out, connect with people. Early on when I was applying for roles, particularly at Bayer, I was applying for 3 different roles, one of which that I wasn't the best fit as a candidate, but I still reached out and connected with that hiring manager, and the amount that I learned and from that person about both building a resume, how to advertise myself, and skills needed was really, really important and impactful. So don't limit yourself. Also, this may sound funny, but don't form loyalties this early. You should be talking to everyone, right? If you're talking to Corteva, make sure you're also talking to Bayer, Syngenta, BASF, and then of course, obviously all of my perspectives are coming from an industry approach here, since that is my experience, but also make sure you're reaching out to different PIs, universities, etc. One thing that I think distinguished myself from some of the other candidate pool when I was applying for jobs is I was really quite adamant, potentially even a little bit annoying, contacting hiring managers. So when there was a role that I learned about that I was interested in, or maybe I had questions, because I'll be the first to admit sometimes our role descriptions are not always the most detailed. So reach out, find out who that hiring manager is using your network, and set up some one-on-one time with them. Of all the roles that I was applying to, not once was I turned down by a hiring manager, but make sure you're coming prepared to those meetings. It is in essence a mini mock interview, right, with that person. So make sure you come with your questions and your passion and the ability to really elevate or pitch yourself. And then one other thing that I did that I thought was really helpful was I actually reached out to others that were in that same role within the organization. So when I was when I was applying for the role as a soybean product development scientist, I actually reached out to other soybean breeders in Bayer and asked them things like, what is important to soybean breeding right now? What are your 3 top challenges? And then I had insider information, right, when I was in that interview. and I could talk about how my skills and my technical experience could apply to those really important themes for soybean breeding. So don't sleep on that. Make sure you're connecting with people. The last thing that I'll say on this slide is to either be a star or be smart. If you don't know what this means, please take the time to Google and educate yourself. There's lots of wonderful resources out there, but I'm referring to behavioral interview questions. They're a brain burner. They're meant to be hard. They're meant to be difficult. This is where your skills as a person and your soft skills as a person, a collaborator, and a teammate really come out. So make sure you understand these interview methods and that you practice, practice, and practice. And of course, have more examples than you think you're going to need. Don't go into an interview with just 5 situational examples. Make sure you have more than that and really spend some time being intentional. And then, of course, remember you're also interviewing the company. Don't be that person that doesn't have a question when they ask you, the interview panel asks you, so do you have questions for us? Make sure you have questions, right? This is supposed to be a good fit for you too. You want to be happy and successful here as well. All right, I think I'm doing okay on time still. Power talking. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about is after you have nailed the job interview, you've been offered the role, the next steps and how you can be successful in that onboarding process. So I think it's worth mentioning that onboarding is not the same thing as orientation. Onboarding can happen over the process of weeks, months, and even years. I am still continually learning in my current role. And so expect to really be putting in this foundation early, but also never think that you're going to stop putting in effort here. So really, when you think about that first step, when you get your role, is you need to become the technical expert. You need to get really good at what you were hired to do. So take the time to really learn your role. Don't rush this part because this is going to be the foundation to your success for the years to come. And don't be in a rush to leave a technical space, right? As you think about where your career trajectory is going to take you. So who do you report to? What are your deliverables? Who are your stakeholders? Really understand what your role is. Then the next step, and always, will be to continue to grow your network. Make sure you're connecting with your team, but don't limit yourself. Continue to connect outside your team, across functions, divisions, organizations, and even companies. It's a small world, plant breeding, and I think we can all continue to learn from each other and grow and become better people. And most importantly, make sure you're identifying your support system early. So who are those people that are going to help you when you hit a wall and you're struggling, you don't know who to go for help, or you're struggling maybe with a particular person you're working with. Make sure you identify your support system. These people will make you successful. Be bold and transparent. I think this is the most important key when you come out of grad school. I think a lot of us potentially can be intimidated. We work with amazing, amazing people, but you don't need to know everything. It's not your job to. In grad school, we tend to be very specified, and our technical expertise is pretty specific. In industry, you're going to be asked to do things and learn things that are way outside your skill set, right? So make sure you're bold and you ask questions. Be transparent as well with your needs and your knowledge. It's okay to say that you don't know something. There's nothing that will slow down a team's, innovation and ability to make change and deliver when somebody's unwilling to just say they don't know or ask a question. So be brave. I promise it pays off. If you have a question, so does somebody else. And oftentimes when I do ask that, well, why do we do this question? The answer is, well, actually, I don't really know. So maybe we should dig into that a little bit and find out why. So your experience as a new person and your perspective is incredibly valuable. So don't be afraid to use it. And then finally, get involved, stretch yourself, find a project that really challenges you and commit to it. It doesn't have to be a big project right away. You can start small, but make sure you're contributing to something early on in your career. The best way to learn is by doing. So maybe you sit down with your direct report manager and you identify a developmental need, put together a project where you actually have to deliver something at the end of the year, and that's going to force you to actually spend time learning that skill. Rather than sitting through, a data camp course or something, right? Actually do it. For me, this involved my first few months actually of joining Bear in my current role. I was given a lead role, a position on a high throughput phenotyping project, which was pretty far out of my depth because I had never studied that in grad school. And it involved leading people that knew way more than me in the space. And so that was a stretch opportunity for me, but I embraced it. I embraced that upwards learning trajectory. It was an uphill climb for a few years. But I'm happy to tell you now that it really paid off. I've learned so much about project management as well as just that space. So commit to something early and stick to it. So the next thing I want to talk about is growing a successful career. Now, I think this is a little bit different because the three other buckets I've talked about thus far, though I think those are skills you need to continually reiterate, but they're primarily very important for early career and those first few years of joining or transitioning into a role. What I have here on the slide is what I believe needs to be a continual focus throughout your entire career journey. And that's why you see that circular arrow. So first and foremost, be agile and open-minded. In industry, you will find things change very quickly. We change between projects. We drive hard for innovation and change. And so that means you really need to have a growth mindset and don't get stuck in the way of doing things. That's the fastest way to slow down your career trajectory, is to get too comfortable with what you're doing. So embrace change. But don't also be afraid to challenge change and ask questions and ask the why. Make sure you're pushing for change, but also making sure you're understanding why we're doing things. The next thing on here that I want to mention is focus on your strengths. I'm speaking from personal experience, but I know when I first joined Bear, I suffered quite strongly from imposter syndrome, as well as seeing that, I was working with these amazing people that had skills that I just didn't have, in my toolbox. But that's okay. Take the time to actually understand your strengths and focus on those, because those are the things that you're actually bringing to the role that are going to make an impact. You were hired for a reason. We don't all have to do things the same way. So make sure you understand what you're bringing to the table. And I've listed 3 assessments here on the screen. So Clifton Strengths, Shapes, and DISC, which are really invaluable tools to help you better understand what you bring to the table as a person. So make sure, if you do anything, maybe take one of these, preferably 2 or all of them. I don't know, that's up to you in your developmental journey. But also I think it's important to realize that we're all individuals. We all bring different strengths, but the beauty about teamwork and collaborative breeding is that we get to partner with people that complement our strengths. So find people that, that are really, say you're not strong in innovation, find somebody who's really good at that, right? If you're the workhorse and you drive change, make sure you find somebody who can be futuristic thinking, things like that. And then the last thing I'll say is don't forget about your professional development. Obviously, you are all here today, so that's important to you. I'd encourage you to keep thinking about how you improve as a person. Obviously, each one of you is, whether you land the role, you got into grad school, you publish a paper, whatever you've done in your life, you're a talented individual and you're an awesome person, but we can always improve as people. So you can improve how you collaborate, you can improve how you are as a team member and as an individual contributor as well. And then, one thing that I think is really important is work with your managers and mentors often to identify areas of development that you can work on to grow in. Okay, so this brings me to the end. And like I mentioned when I started, I'm currently 3 years in role. So I have to be reminded all the time of this advice. And so I want to share with you just a few little nuggets that I've gotten from my mentors. And the first being that careers are long and you're just at the beginning. So it's very easy to feel rushed to figure out what you're doing. But careers last anywhere from 30 to 40 or plus years, right? So you've got time. You can calm down and enjoy the ride. And there are many paths to success. So never be afraid to be curious, explore, ask questions, talk to people that are in a completely different role than you are right now, or maybe think about roles that you would never have given thought to before, because you may find your true passion there. don't be afraid to take a career risk. Even if it makes you nervous, that's probably a good thing. You may end up like evolving your career in ways you never expected. And then first and foremost, and I have this written on a sticky note that I remind myself all the time, is don't be in a hurry. Take the time to really learn and grow in your current role, and you will know when it is time to transition. So I know it was limited time, so I breezed through a lot of things, and so thank you for the opportunity to do that. I'd really love to connect with you offline or in person, to share a little bit more of my experience and how I believe I've established a successful career. But yeah, with that, I'll stop sharing, and I'm sure you guys have lots of great questions. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kohler and Dr. Jones, for that very wonderful presentation. I also learned a lot from that. So we have a couple of questions in our chat box. So first, some of our attendees are wondering what might be the future of plant breeders in developing countries where a lot of these modern technologies are currently not available, or maybe available but in the distant future.
Yeah, I think that's of course to some degree true, but also, for example, I have contact to a banana breeding project in Africa that does have access to like CGIAR type of institutions. And so in that context, you still use technologies. I mean, right now, for example, if you have a critical disease in a crop, you would probably try to use, try to identify markers that have a solid inheritance with good segregation with that disease, susceptibility or resistance. And that's a much better approach than just a pure phenotyping. So I think also I would say in the drone applications, or looking at novel phenotyping, there could be ways how that could be interesting and actually isn't that expensive. But yes, I understand. Depending on the developing country, there's some regulations also in some countries that wouldn't make it that easy to use drones. But I think it's just going to be a slower process. But in some cases, you may see a faster adaptation of certain things. You can think about right now, there are methods how you can take a picture with your smartphone, and you could easily count kernels, for example, rather than doing that by hand. So I think some of these things will find out may not introduce quite as fast.
Dr. Kohler, it looks like the internet on your end is unstable. Your voice was breaking actually.
Okay, yeah, I just see that here. Okay, well, what I can do is I can turn off my video. Maybe that will help. Okay, so then the next question, let's see here.
Yeah, so we also have a question here that has been submitted, and also it has also been submitted during the registration. So doing internship in companies is a great opportunity to develop your technical skills and also build network. So can you shed light on some internship or dissertation or thesis opportunities that are available in private industry?
So normally dissertations will not be available in private industry. Dissertations that you do, you have a private sponsor or partial sponsor of a project. But again, the dissertation itself will always be at some kind of a college or university related to that. And yes, of course, a lot of companies have internships, and I would definitely recommend any kind of internship, any kind of experience. There are also internships for grad students. So I think any experience that you can have to be within the private sector while you're a grad student is something I would highly recommend taking advantage of. Any kind of invitation you get to a company program or some kind of a maybe targeted effort to recruiting, I would always recommend participating, because it'll give you those insights that Brittany was talking about in terms of understanding, meeting people, networking, getting to know potential hiring managers, learning how people operate. So it's just a great opportunity, I would think.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me adding, I know at Bayer we have different types of internships. So there's a co-op, which is typically a 6-month opportunity that you can take at the end of your graduate career typically, or there's summer internships, which are usually about 3 months. I think that the track record for people who get hired after having done an internship is pretty high. So they're a wonderful opportunity. If you want to talk to some people who've recently done that and transitioned into industry, please reach out and I can help put you in contact with some people.
All right, thank you. We also have some questions here that has also been submitted. Do plant breeding related positions actually require PhD nowadays?
I would say mostly yes. Of course, not all of them do. It depends on the position that's being offered. But for a plant breeder, I would say mostly yes. It would require a PhD.
All right, so we have a couple more questions here. So we still have time, so let's power through this. So some of the grad students are working on a very niche crop. So we've received some examples, like some grad students are working in turf grasses, but they want to shift into plant breeding for major crops such as probably wheat, corn, rice. So how do they make these transitions from very niche crop to major crops?
I think it's relatively easy. I would say if you look at myself, I did my PhD in rye, which is not a huge crop. It's basically a crop in Germany and Poland and maybe a couple of Scandinavian countries. So I think the most important thing is that your subject that you did with any crop is relevant, and you learn skills, you learn about the technology, you understand how genomic prediction works, maybe you use some novel phenotyping approaches. So the crop, I think, is less important. What's more important is the skills you learned while you did your degree.
Yeah, I would like to echo that, because, and I'm certainly don't speak from experience because I went from wheat to soybean, so still two big crops, but your technical skills will transfer. And so when you are prepared to make that transition, or if you're interested in roles, right, that are crop different than the crop you've specialized in, make sure you take the time to understand what is important in that crop, and then very detailed make a plan of how your skills will impact that and how you can have a positive value add. So you're still learning plant breeding. Maybe it's not in one of the major 3, but it's still completely applicable.
All right, thank you. So we have a very important question here. So what are the common challenges that plant breeders are facing at the moment, and what do you guys think can be done to solve them?
I mean, my perspective right away is the size of data, and this may be an industry specific perspective, but how do we start thinking about using a massive amount of data that we're capitalizing, that we're learning about? How do we actually start using that data in a smart way to inform how we're placing products, how we're making decisions? I think that's incredibly important. and that definitely comes to mind right away for me. So make sure you're coming in with skills of how you can think about big data, how you think about genomics data on a large scale, to really make decisions and move the needle forward. But Klaus, I'd be interested in your perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I think that is the challenge. I think that's the number one challenge in, I would say, in private industry. The other challenge is, of course, when you think of a large breeding company, that everybody is kind of spread out, in all continents. And I think that's
Klaus, you've got robot voice going on again.
Oh, okay.
You're back now, so maybe you can try again.
Okay. So what I was saying is the other challenge that I see probably for larger companies, larger organizations, is that you are very spread out. And although nowadays, that's getting better with all the tools we have to communicate virtually, but kind of getting I think another challenge that I see is just getting a common vision. That always takes time and is just hard to implement sometimes.
I would also add that sustainability is really important, especially I know with Bayer, it's one of our #1 goals right now is thinking about how we do more with less. How do we do better for our environment and our world, and impact those smaller communities as well. So thinking about how plant breeding fits into that, and how we test different genotypes and make product placements is important as well.
All right, so we have a lot of questions, but in the interest of time, I think we cannot cover all of them. So maybe we can shoot for one last question here. So what it's like leading a group of team that have varying roles, have varying skill set?
Yeah, I can kick it off first. I think it's one of my most favorite things to do, actually. I've learned them in my little time in industry that the beauty is that we get to work quite often cross-functionally. And so that means in order to lead a team like that, you have to understand the motivations and the limitations of the different team members. So understanding their perspective, if it's a data scientist, in terms of their timeline and what they can get done and the resources they have available to them, as well as people that are in the tech space or on the breeding pipeline itself. So it's really having that ability to be a translator across. I've found actually, as my role as a soybean product development scientist in those types of lead roles, that it's my job to translate and to bring value. So always advocating for the breeding pipeline and why what we do is important, and communicating that to folks that maybe don't have that hands-on or theoretical understanding of why it's important that we make selections and test things the way that we do. So really being able to have vision, and understanding people's motivation and what limits them as well.
Yeah, so Dr. Kohler and Dr. Jones, could you please share your email? There are like a lot of questions. And everyone feel free to contact Dr. Kohler or Dr. Jones if you have more questions, because we have limited time. We cannot attend all the questions. And thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today. And your active participation is really appreciated. And we would like to thank NAPB Commercial Plant Breeding Committee once again for organizing such a great webinar. Thank you once again. And one more announcement before we adjourn today. Soon, NAPB Graduate Student Working Group will be announcing the secretary position. So students, please consider applying for this position. NAPB is a great platform. As Dr. Kohler and Dr. Jones mentioned about networking, you get to meet people and connect with them. So consider applying for this position. Thank you once again.